بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, we seek His assistance, His guidance, His love, and His mercy, and we seek refuge in Him from the evils that exist within ourselves, the evils that are manifested in our actions, the evils that occupy our communities and our societies. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, no one can misguide. And whomsoever Allah does not bless and bestow with His power, with His guidance, with His love, with His mercy, no one can give that person guidance, no one can give that person truth, no one can give that person power, no one can give that person credence. And I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His last and final messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in some incredibly beautiful verses that we hear week after week, what could be translated as, O you who believe, be conscious of the presence of Allah in your lives, and do not die except as Muslims in submission to Allah. O mankind, be conscious of your Lord, who created you from one soul, and created from it its mate, and dispersed from both of them many men and women, and have a consciousness of Allah, through whom you ask one another, and remember the wombs that bore you. Verily Allah is an ever-watcher over you. And the Exalted continues in the third verse: O you who have believed, be conscious of Allah, and speak words of appropriate justice. He will then amend for you your deeds, and forgive you your sins. And whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger has surely attained a great attainment. Brothers and sisters, family and friends, community members, there's an important intervention that needs to happen in our community where we take responsibility for what is happening around us. But there's an important intervention that we as a community need to have where we start taking responsibility for the things that are happening around us. And responsibility is something that is profoundly part of the methodology and practice of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Can folks hear me? Alhamdulillah. And I want to start off with a story. I like the story a lot. Don't focus too much on the bits and pieces of the story, but I like the example that this story sets. And it's about a king. I don't condone monarchies, but it's an important story that I appreciate. The story is about a king that wanted to test the sincerity of his people. So he asked that a giant pot be placed in the middle of the town square. And he demanded that everybody in the city put a cup of honey in this pot. The king checks the contents of the pot the next day, and he realizes that it's a giant pot filled with water. The reality was that everybody that walked up to that pot said the same thing. What is my cup of water going to do in the context of this giant pot that's going to be filled with honey? Every person that walked up to that pot said the same exact thing. I'm going to put a cup of water because what is my cup going to do? Because the next person is going to put their cup of honey, and the next person is going to put their cup of honey, and the next person is going to put the cup of honey. And there are hundreds of thousands of people in the city. There are millions of people in the city. What is my cup of water going to do in the context of this giant pot? Somebody else, it won't change the contents. The king checks the contents and he realizes that it's a giant pot filled with water because everybody said the same thing. Everybody diffused and pushed their responsibility onto somebody else. We have to start taking responsibility of our actions. Sometimes we focus on the collective and we focus on the grand responsibility of things, but we lose sight of our immediate impact. We lose sight of our immediate impact. How you parked when you came in here is part of your responsibility. What you do after salah, where you put your shoes, how you treat people at work, how you treat the person at the supermarket. These are little things that impact the larger scope of justice work. And this is the purpose of my khutbah today, is to take responsibility for the justice work that we have to commit to as individuals. Half of the work is actually taking responsibility. Half of the work is recognizing that there's a problem that exists in the first place. And part of that problem is recognizing, and this is important for our community. It's important for the Muslim community to recognize that half of taking responsibility is recognizing that our democracy in this country has never worked. So I work for a civil rights organization, CARE, and we provide direct legal services to people that are impacted by law enforcement abuse, particularly the FBI. And we do immigration work and other services. And there's a Supreme Court case that's in front of the U.S. Supreme Court right now called Fazaka versus the FBI. And if folks are not familiar with that case, the FBI sent in an informant into the Southern California community. And this is something that the Muslim community post 9/11 had been talking about, right? We had been saying that the FBI is infiltrating our community, that law enforcement is in our community, that there are informants in our community. And this case proved it, and it's finally at the Supreme Court. So what happens? The FBI sends essentially an informant to go into the Muslim community. That person marries someone from the community. The initial ask is to just record things that are happening in the masjid. And then they want to push the agenda a little bit more, and they say, we want to see if you can incite the hidden violence that exists within the Muslim community. And they start asking this person who, gained the trust of the Muslim community for a long time. He was, working with the youth and so on and so forth. And he starts having conversations with these youth, with these young people and other folks in the community. And he says, do you want to do such and such? Would you like to travel to such and such place? And the Muslim community gets kind of weirded out. The young people go to their parents and they say to their parents, this person is telling us to do 1, 2, 3. This person is telling us to do such and such. And the Muslim community reports with CARE. They go to the FBI. They report the person to the FBI. The FBI makes a public show, and what do? They arrest him. They arrest the individual. And he goes and he says, how are you going to arrest me when I am you? How are you going to arrest me when I am you? And it was a national scandal. And it's finally at the Supreme Court. But it's important for us at this point, the intervention that I'm talking about is recognizing that there are problems, social problems, political problems, economic problems, that we can't just turn away from. And we have to recognize that those problems stem from the very founding of this country and the very ideals of what this country has been built on. And the argument is that it's a democratic state. But the reality is democracy has never worked in America, and there's never been a democracy in America. And part of the khutbah is just to talk us through this reality. American democracy has never worked because the founding of this country didn't envision that you and I would be participating in America. Its founding and its sustenance has been to alienate and criminalize people who look like us and who believe in what we believe in. I'm not just saying criminalize Muslims. I'm saying people who believed and who were wanting to push this country to accept that it must include us in its future. When this country's founders were thinking of that wonderful line in the Bill of Rights, when they were thinking life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they were thinking it to mean the genocide of indigenous people's life, language, history, and culture. This place that we call Elk Grove, Sacramento, Natomas, Folsom, there were people here by different names. The indigenous peoples of the Sacramento region are called the Nisenan Nation. More than 95% of the indigenous peoples across California were wiped out, were massacred by the government, by small militias, by the army that were paid to essentially eradicate these indigenous peoples. These indigenous families, these communities, they fed white folks and clothed white folks and taught white folks how to survive. These settlers, with the help of these small militias and the government, were able to hunt down indigenous families and tribes so that they could settle the land. And the intervention that we need to take responsibility for, the intervention that we need to make, is to recognize that you and I are here. You and I are here because genocide was successful and ongoing. And in 2019, finally, the state of California essentially recognized that there was genocide here and apologized publicly to the indigenous people. This is not like conspiracy theories. This is a reality. It's in the archive. And part of our responsibility is to recognize that if we are here, then we have to know our history. Because this is our history too. If you are going to say that I am from Elk Grove, that I am from Sacramento, if you're going to use your passport to travel anywhere that you want in the world, and that's a reality too, you can go anywhere in the world with an American passport. Why? Have we ever thought of that? America has a military base in every country in the world. And the reason that you can flex your American passport internationally and go anywhere you want is because of the power and dominance of the American government, of the American hegemony. So you're proud American when you're traveling anywhere you want in the world, but taking responsibility of the houselessness in Elk Grove and in Sacramento and across the state of California, that's not my problem. I'm not American now. I'm Egyptian and Afghan and Palestinian. This is the source of American democracy. Brothers and sisters, 800 Muslim men were imprisoned and tortured without restraint in Guantanamo. We haven't forgotten because it's still open. 800 Muslims. It's a prison built for Muslims. 800 Muslims imprisoned and tortured without restraint in Guantanamo. It's an island outside of the law. The youngest boy was a 13-year-old boy. The youngest person in that prison was a 13-year-old boy by the name of Yasser Talal. Sorry, forgive me. Yasser Talal is another individual. The youngest was a 13-year-old boy and the oldest an 89-year-old man. Yasser Talal was a 16-year-old boy who was captured. And as a result of torture and abuse, he took his own life at the age of 21. There have been 9 deaths in Guantanamo. 9 deaths in Guantanamo. 7 of which have been by suicide as a result of the torture. 1 of a heart attack and the other of cancer. And only 1 case out of the 800 in that prison were transferred to a federal court. Now if we look and say to ourselves, Brother Usama, this is happening internationally. What about what's happening in the US? Did you know that 15% of the American prison population is Muslim? Because people are finding Islam within the prisons. And people are struggling during Ramadan. This is some of the things that we don't talk about in Ramadan. Folks are struggling to have food. Some of them would sue and it would take the entire month of Ramadan for them to even sort of win a case. Starving inside of the prison system. But beyond that, did you know that more than 85% of the solitary confinement cases in the US prison system is made up of Muslims? So when we think about Islamophobia, we think about the Muslim sister who's being attacked on the bus. We think about our young people who are being bullied at school. We're talking about the racist teacher down the street in the high school. But we don't think about the Islamophobia that is invisible. And we don't even question the reality that prisons don't work, that they invisibilize social problems. Democracy, brothers and sisters, didn't work when the life, liberty, the liberty and joy essentially was interpreted as white men and white women raping and brutalizing and enslaving generationally black people. More than 40% of the black people that were enslaved and brought to the shores of the US were Muslim. Many of them practiced Islam. Many of them wrote down the Quran. Many of them were scholars. And that sort of prison, that essentially that enslavement system has carried on through the prison system. The groceries that you buy from Whole Foods or Costco, some of it is actually planted in the prison system, and it's cheap labor because then you can pay those workers or pay those imprisoned folks 5 cents an hour. Your iPhone, some of the iPhones are assembled in California prisons because you can pay them 5 cents an hour. Some of the fires, the California fires, the firefighters that were on the front lines were imprisoned folks. The prison system in California is a $280 billion industry. $280 billion a year California makes off of prisons. In fact, there was a strategy that was put down in the 80s to essentially revitalize the California economy because it had sunk. And they said you can actually leverage private prisons as an opportunity to get California out of the rut that it was in. Democracy isn't working today with killer cops manifesting violence on black folks. Democracy isn't working as we debate the legality of separating families and displacing unhoused people and criminalizing and surveilling Muslim leaders and Muslim students. Democracy isn't working if we're debating and legitimizing the concentration of children inside the cruel cages of this justice system. Democracy isn't working when race and class hierarchies in this country are so prevalent that you can smell it, that you can taste it. The top 1% own more than 90% of the wealth in this country. And there's statistics that say that it would take between 400 to 4,000 years for black people to reach the same level of housing equality as white people. And it would mean total economic stagnation from white folks. The violence in this country is in the air we breathe, and it's historic. And the great poet Langston Hughes writes in the 60s, he writes, "I swear to the Lord I can't see why democracy means everybody but me." I mention all of this to say, brothers and sisters, we have to know what has been for us to make sense of where we are going. We have to take responsibility of this history. We have to take responsibility of this present to make sense of where we are going as a community and as also individuals. Buildings are great. Our community has struggled to put buildings up, has struggled and continues to struggle to build buildings. We're at a point now where we have to do this intervention, where we ask ourselves and ask our leadership and ask our community, what are we going to do with these buildings? What is the future going to look like? And the future is consciousness. The future is consciousness. We cannot allow ourselves to be swallowed up, and this is an important intervention too. We cannot allow ourselves to be swallowed up by our own perceptions of this moment. Just because America has been good to me doesn't make America good. Just because we have made a life for us and our families here doesn't mean that there isn't an active injustice that is happening in this country, and an active injustice that's happening around us, and an active injustice that we are complicit in, even if we say, I want nothing to do with it. There's a responsibility to do something about it. We celebrate, brothers and sisters, community members, the four scholars, four great madahib, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, but they all went to prison. They were all jailed for speaking truth to power. Following in their footsteps doesn't just mean that you take their opinion on fasting. Doesn't just mean that you take their opinions when you're traveling. It doesn't mean that you take their opinion on just legal matters when it comes to fiqh issues. It also means understanding the example that they set in learning and studying and speaking and teaching the truth. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Make dua in this moment. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Brothers and sisters, community members, democracy is something that we write. It has to be something that we commit to. Democracy is something that we must learn and unlearn. Democracy is something that we must mold and struggle to make a reality. And the justice that we seek is only possible through the people. Democracy is possible through the people. Justice is possible through the people. Justice is possible when we make personal sacrifices as small business persons and homeowners and students and teachers. Justice is possible sometimes when we vote against our interests. Justice is possible when we are constantly seeking to uplift those that are struggling in our midst. It's possible only through allyship and solidarity and community building and community learning and community healing. You know, one of the things that's profound to me is that we're still arguing in our community whether we should vote or not. Like, we still believe that voting is the bare minimum. We're still talking in 2021, we're still talking as a community whether we should vote or not. I'm still doing voter registration when it comes to the community, the Muslim community. Brothers and sisters, that was the work of the 60s. That was the work of the 70s. That was the work of the 80s. That's people marching so that they can vote. That's people being killed so that they can vote. In 2021, we can't be mobilizing our community to vote. We have to be thinking broader and more intentional and more strategic. We have to be thinking more consciously. And yes, the reality is we keep putting people in office that let us down. We keep asking the community to go vote, and the reality is we get someone who's just as bad as the one before, or maybe a little bit better, and we get sort of depressed, and we get angry, and we get frustrated, and we say the lesser of two evils isn't working. But the reality is that this has to be a struggle of a lifetime. This has to be a commitment of a lifetime. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't going to judge you because you weren't able to put the most ideal candidate in office that gives you everything that you want and serves the interests of justice through and through. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقُلْ اعْمَلُوا وَسَيَرَى اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do the work. Our responsibility is to do the work, to see the people who are struggling in our midst, to recognize the people that are struggling in our midst. And sometimes it baffles me sometimes when people have been coming to the same masjid. I'm not saying this exists here, but it baffles me that people have been coming to the same masjid for years, don't even know each other's names. Have been sitting next to each other, pray the sunnahs next to each other, see each other at Fajr and Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib, don't even know each other's names. Don't know each other's families. Don't know what folks are struggling with, what they need. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the methodology of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was that he was constantly listening to people. He was constantly with the people. Constantly with the people. To the point that there was a man, subhanAllah, there was a man who had a hearing issue. And when the verse was revealed, O you who have believed, do not raise your voices above the voice of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When that verse was revealed, the brother, the Sahabi who had a hearing issue stopped coming to the masjid. Are you with me? The Sahabi who had a hearing issue stopped coming to the masjid because he thought that because he had a hearing issue and sometimes he spoke a little loud, and the verse said, O people who have believed, do not raise your voices above the voice of the Prophet, he thought that he would disrespect and disobey the command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so he stopped coming to the masjid. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, by name, where is so-and-so? And when they say he's not here, he's at home, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam rushes to his house and knocks on his door, and he says, where are you? This verse doesn't apply to you. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew exactly why he wasn't showing up to the masjid. This is someone who was in touch with his community, who loved his people. A man walks up to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, grabs him, shakes him, says, where's my money? Imagine that. The leader of the Muslim community, the equivalent of the monarch of the Muslim community, the empire, and so on and so forth. You could just walk up to his place of residence. You could just walk up to his palace. Where are the guards? He walks up all the way to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, grabs him by the collar and shakes him and says, where's my money? The audacity. And the companions take out their swords. Umar radiallahu anhu takes out his sword. He says, this is unacceptable. We're going to handle business on this brother. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, wait. I do owe him money. He's a little early. Give him his money and give him more of it. This was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the example that we need to live and embody. The Prophet wasn't just someone that we can't sort of touch. These stories are in the Sunnah not for fun. No, not so that we can feel good for a couple of days or feel good after a khutbah and reinforce our faith. There was a methodology in practice. There was a therapeutic process that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ institutionalized. And it's in our Quran. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about you and about us as a community? كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You are amongst the best of nations, established and grounded for people. It's in the Quran. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You are amongst the best of nations, established for Allah. Allah needs your prayers and your charity. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You're amongst the best of nations, established and grounded for people. What do we do? And the answer is in that verse. تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. That you stand firmly against what is foul and destructive. Sorry, forgive me. تأمرون بالمعروف. That you command towards righteousness and love and goodness and success and healing. وتنهون عن المنكر. And that you stand firmly against what is foul and destructive. And that you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وتؤمنون بالله. That you believe in Allah. There's a cyclical process. There's a cyclical relationship between the amal, right, the work. The work is serving people. The work is making sure that people are safe and good. And that you stand firmly with everything that you are against what is foul and destructive. And the belief, وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ, because La ilaha illallah is active. La ilaha illallah is not just on the tongue, it's felt in the body. It moves you towards service. And so your service reinforces your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And your relationship, your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grounds your service. Incredible. So what I'm asking from you today is to commit to being more conscious of the community around you. Commit to reading and education. Commit to participating in civil rights and racial justice and economic justice efforts. Commit to being of service to your community. It is necessary, community members, to be informed and engaged however we can. And we have to make sure that justice serves us, and justice serves the people, and justice serves the most marginalized. So raise your hands in dua. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك ربنا سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. O Allah, Master and Sustainer of the heavens and the earth, Giver and Taker of life, we ask you with your most beautiful names, the most gracious, the most merciful, to fill our hearts with your light that never diminishes. O Allah, make us among the good, among the pious, among the righteous, among the active, among the conscious, among the thinkers, among the questioners for justice always, Ya Rabbil Alameen. O Allah, forgive our brothers and our sisters, our family members, those in our presence and those who have passed. Indeed, you are Allah near to us, all hearing. You answer the call of those that call upon you. O Allah, guide us. O Allah, guide us. O Allah, guide us and place us in the company of those that you've guided. O Allah, protect us from pain and sickness and sadness and keep us in the company of those that you've protected. O Allah, forgive us and keep us in the company of those that you've forgiven. O Allah, you know these hearts, these people have gathered on this day of Jummah in loving you, so give them more love. And gathered in worship and in service to you, so increase this love and increase this worship. And give us, Ya Allah, the patience and the wisdom to confront the forces of injustice with patience and determination and an unwavering commitment to truth, Ya Latif. O Allah, nurture this bond between us through the Quran. Fill our hearts with the light of the Quran and with your light that never diminishes. O Allah, we ask for your love and the love of those that love you. O Allah, we ask for your love and the love of those that love you. O Allah, we ask for your love and the love of those that love you. O Allah, do not make us among the oppressors. Make the Muslims everywhere a source of goodness and use us, O Allah, for goodness and justice. Wa aqim as-salah.